Introduce our guest today, and her name is Eun Strawser. And Eun, it's so great to have you here. Welcome to the Dare to Multiply podcast. And I'm just really honored that you would take time out of your schedule to be with us, and looking forward to learning from you and from this conversation. And today we're going to be talking about from spectators to mature disciples. And you have a book out that has that as the subtitle. I saw that and I was like, wow, what a great topic. That's something that's so important for all of the people I know who are listening to this Dare to Multiply podcast and wanting to multiply mature disciples, see people move from spectators into that place where they're multiplying disciples themselves. And I love your book. I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. It's awesome. Really, really great job on that. But first of all, and just tell us a little bit about yourself. And where do you live? How did you start to get interested in making disciples? And I know you're a medical doctor. That's really interesting as well. So yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cindy, and thank you for this opportunity. Oh man, I can't tell a little bit about my story unless there is a context. So I was born in South Korea. My family immigrated to the United States, to Philadelphia. So I did all my growing up, becoming an adult in West Philadelphia.
Okay.
Met my husband. We had 3 kids. Then we moved to Hawaii about 15 years ago. So that's where we're at now.
Okay.
I have always been a co-vocational a pastor. I'm the co-vocational lead pastor of a local community, missional communities multiplying here in Honolulu, Hawaii, for the past 6 years. This is our second church plant. I've been in ministry for about 20 years, but I'm co-vocational. So I'm also a physician, like you mentioned. And it was actually really a pivotal point in this second church plant to be able to model what discipleship could actually look like. That actually was a benefit to be co-vocational versus vocational. This is not to say that every leader and every church leader needs to be co-vocational. I just know that I get to also live in a benefit from living this way, because it already from the get-go convinces a group of people that you're modeling for what discipleship could look like, that, oh, actually, it's not just professional ministry leaders who are the only ones who are called to disciple others. That is actually me and you and everybody in our community that are also given that same call. That's not a special leadership call, but it's the same call to all of us. So my life has been probably thinking through discipleship and how to quote unquote normalize it in the Western church world, because I just believe so wholeheartedly in this work.
Yeah, that's so amazing. And I love that. I was thinking to myself as you were talking, I wonder if the Apostle Paul did tent making partly to show that, not only to earn money and have enough to provide for himself, but also to demonstrate that it can be done, that you can be a normal person working a normal job, you have a family, you have a life, and you're making disciples and you're multiplying groups of disciples. And so important. And I love that you gave the, sort of disclaimer that not everybody is called to do that, but it is such a great encouragement, I'm sure, for the people around you to see that you're not just working any job, you're working an intense job that's demanding, and takes a lot, but you're still very much involved and make time and have time to live a healthy, abundant life and make disciples as you're going about that. Curious to hear how you do that. And I'm sure people who are listening, want to hear more. I know I do. But tell us, first of all, I don't want people who only get to tune in for a little while to miss hearing about your book. Your book is called Centering Discipleship, right?
Mm-hmm.
And tell us a little bit, why did you write this book and how did this even come about?
Yeah, I think it's probably fair to say that most females wear about 10 different hats in our lives, right? And so, the pertinent ones, one is I do a lot of consulting and coaching for church planters, remissioning pastors, marketplace leaders, community development workers. So a lot of the questions around it, especially in the church planting world and remissioning world, has been around discipleship, right? If you're trying to, anytime that leadership wants to talk about growth, or how do you actually have a growth edge for your church, or what you're trying to think about in terms of multiplication, for me, I'm like, if you don't have clarity on what it is that you actually want to multiply, then how would you know what it is that you're doing? And
Mm,
so I think the clarity is in, if we don't actually understand what it means to move discipleship, which is at best on the periphery of our churches, then how do we actually begin to center discipleship to the life of our communities, whether it's marketplace, leadership, or even Christian community development environments? I think that if we don't center the topic of discipleship, if we don't center the equipping of disciples, if we don't clarify the definition of a disciple, then we will never know what we're actually trying to grow through or multiply for. That's
mm,
why I think that a lot of these conversations, and I myself, I was looking for other materials and books, and as people were asking me questions, and I just found a lot of things that were maybe some suggestions on soul care, maybe, right? A
mm-hmm,
lot of times discipleship has not dwindled down, but it just got compartmentalized as maybe some soul care, emotional health, right? Those kinds of things. They're wonderful. We all need it. I just think that
mm,
that's probably one aspect of how a person will mature to be more like Christ, right?
mm,
Some discipleship materials were more so about what is the message of the Bible, right? Or the biblical story, right? And then it turns an entire community of people to think that the only way that I am more holy or more discipled is if I can know more about the Bible. And I'm like, you'll probably be really great at like biblical trivia, but I'm not so certain how much more of a mature imitator of Jesus you're becoming, right? So a lot of these
mm,
kinds of questions, clarifying questions, help me to be like, okay, if we were to actually clarify what discipleship is, and if we were to clarify what are markers of maturity as disciples and imitators of Jesus, if were able to clarify that within our own churches, congregations, communities, we probably will have a better chance at centering discipleship instead of just putting it in the periphery at best. And maybe some discipleship programs, teachings, we kind of throw that word around as like mentorship, maybe,
mm-hmm,
or counseling or accountability. But
mm,
I am just in a strong belief that it's very different from those things,
mm.
and it's so pivotal to the life of a church.
So good. So centering discipleship is all about bringing discipleship back to the center of everything we do, whether it's community development, whether it's church work, whatever it is, looking at how do we get that command that Jesus gave us to make disciples to be at the center. And I want to read a quote from your first chapter. You said, somehow along the way, discipleship became synonymous with assimilation into church culture. Making disciples came to mean helping people participate in Christian activities. While being a disciple of Jesus involves partnering with the local church, it's by no means the whole picture or the full picture. If we honestly and humbly examine ourselves, Emily, we must admit to living in self-deception. So I love that. It's so clear and so true, and very pointed. We are deceived if we think that discipleship is just about getting people involved in Christian activities, or to pray a prayer and call themselves a Christian, and show up at church once in a while. That's what discipleship is, and there's so much more that Jesus died to offer us in that way, and really excited to hear more. But yeah, how about if you could start out by just sharing maybe a story of somebody that who has moved from spectator to a mature disciple as you've worked with them, trained them, maybe in your own church, or even maybe your own story. How'd that happen for you?
Yeah, no, that's good. I love, this is my favorite part of any of these kinds of conversations, is to be able to be like, real stories matter, right? One of
Mm-hmm.
the biggest questions that people ask me is like, can we really do this? if I
Mhm.
put in the hard work, and wearing my leadership hat and really thinking about centering discipleship, working on a discipleship pathway, all those kinds of things, does it really work? And for me, I'm just like, one, we won't know unless we try.
Mhm.
We won't know unless we've made plenty of mistakes, because all of this right now, especially in a Western church world, it's pioneering work to think about centering discipleship actively and intentionally, right? And so I think these kinds of stories really, really do matter. One person in our community, her name is Kelsey. I write about her in the book. She's probably a person who she happens to be a hospice care nurse. She self-proclaimed that she probably looks like she's 12 years old, and no one will ever be convinced that she's old enough. But because of the look, right? Being female, looking younger, being a transplant in Hawaii, a lot of the quote unquote leadership roles in the church, in established church setting, she'll always be missed, right? And so in a previous church context, she was probably the star greeter. She's so kind, and she's such a wonderful personality, and everyone always connected to Kelsey, right? But we knew that there was a bigger dream in her. So in this church plan, she was invited in to just go through a discipleship pathway together. We started with about 15 people. This was my main work for the first year. Was 90% of my job was just focused on these 15 people, as we connected to doing community dinners and those kinds of things. But discipleship was the main thing, focus for that first year, and Kelsey was a part of that group. So going through our unique discipleship pathway, learning about what it means to imitate Jesus, all those kinds of things. What got birthed in Kelsey is the fact that she loves seniors. She
Mm.
loves the elderly, and she started feeling like, oh, maybe God just didn't make me a hospice care nurse because it pays the bills, or it's like I just like sitting with a senior population. So year two, she was one of the teams that multiplied into another missional community. So a missional community for us is a discipleship core, about 12 to 15 persons who are actively being discipled through a discipleship pathway. That group is tethered to what we call a missional community, where it's a group that's open to both Christians and non-Christians, but they act and live on mission together, right? Some sort of identified space of mission. So Kelsey and her team that she got together, a volunteer group who also shared a passion for seniors. They're called Kupuna here in Hawaii. And they just identified one low income senior living facility in the neighborhood that they lived in. And so they just started doing, bingo nights. What senior group doesn't love bingo night and pizza? So that's what they did. That was their in. And what seemed like a social group gathering, all the while Kelsey's doing the same thing that she experienced that previous year, of just discipling that small core of people actively, intentionally in the ways of Jesus, right? And you're doing that simultaneously. One of the things they started doing was they just did a normal thing, pray before pizza and bingo. And over time, the seniors, that whole group started growing and growing. And one of the aunties who would come regularly, she has a Buddhist background. She's never been to church before, and people were like, okay, who would like to pray before the meal? And this Buddhist auntie, was like, I'll give it a go. And she said, I noticed that you all pray Father.
Mm.
And I never imagined calling God Father.
Mm.
So she just prayed it, imitating what she's been hearing for almost a year at pizza bingo night. And then she's just started with Father God, and then she broke down in tears. And then everyone just got to pray for her. It didn't stop
Mm.
there. Throughout the pandemic, this one group started multiplying into 3 different low-income senior living facilities. It numbers 500 people. Throughout the pandemic, we actually served them by providing 1 month's worth of groceries every single month for the entire duration of the pandemic. After that, so that faithfulness and consistency of living missionally, because these disciples were discipled by Kelsey, who was discipled meaningfully that first year, grew a heart to be able to identify, who are my neighbors, who is God calling me to, who are the people that I'm praying for by name, where is an identified space of mission that God's inviting me to partner in, right? If discipleship includes all of that, fast
Mm.
forward, and at this point, This group has actually multiplied their own discipleship cores, that there are discipleship cores within the Kupuna population. These are seniors discipling one another, using the clarity of what's the full gospel, what does it mean to live in thick community, right? Those kinds of things that are unique to our discipleship. And they are continuing to multiply that into these other living facilities. So this is what I mean about the power of, if you center discipleship as that is the main focus, what would happen to an entire community? It actually would focus on mission. It actually would focus on how to neighbor better. It would actually focus on how do we actually communally love our neighbors together and not pursue this very individualistic Christianity that most of our churches have come to be known as.
Wow, what a beautiful story. And, there's so many things I love about that story, but I love that she was an ordinary person who was not, she had a dream that was bigger than what she was already doing. And I just think there are so many Kelseys, that are in churches around the world, not only in the West, but all over the globe, who are people who God's called to make a difference and to be people who are missional, and yet they've never been equipped to do it. They've never seen a pathway. I'd love to hear more about your discipleship pathways and what they look like. You may or may not know, mostly the people who listen to this podcast and who I've been training and teaching are in the church planting movement, disciple making movement sort of realm. But I'm super passionate about seeing the Western church, the church in Africa, the church in Asia, every disciple being equipped and mobilized to multiply disciples, because there are just so many people who are hurting and broken out there who need to hear about the love of Jesus. And especially in the West, we're in this de-churching period, where so many are leaving the church. And I'm so glad that you're exploring and leading the way in exploring new models, that can work here. So beautiful story. And I love that it multiplied, and it multiplied senior to senior, in these senior communities. And so often a neglected community that we don't think about, but people that God has such a heart for, and Kelsey had a heart for too. That's beautiful. Just wonderful. Well, tell us a little bit more about moving people from spectators to mature disciples. It's not always an easy process, I'm sure. Not every spectator even wants to be a mature disciple. Some people like to just go and sit. So, yeah, what are some of the maybe biggest hurdles that you've overcome as a leader, a spiritual leader to them, and helping them take those steps? What are some of the hurdles that they've had to overcome? Yeah, just talk a little bit about some of the hurdles or the difficulties.
Yeah, I think that so the name of our church is Makilo'o. It means presence in Hawaiian. We're like, we want to be a people of presence, present with one another, present in the community around us. And people hear this story, oh my gosh, Eun's church is multiplying. We're in year 6 now. We've had one missional community, and now we multiply to 9, and now we're going to multiply to 12 by the end of the year. People love that part of the story,
Yeah.
centering discipleship. Oh my gosh, it must mean that year 1 you start with one discipleship core, use a pathway, and then automatically in 6 years time you're going to multiply to 12. I'm like, wow, there's a lot of heartache that happens.
Yep.
And people are just like, how do you actually multiply disciples and all that? I'm like, if leaders don't actually understand the gift and art of loving people, being faithful to people, that discipleship, a lot of the time spent on it, and why I chose to just spend that 90% of my time just with that initial discipleship core, is because it takes time to love people well. I don't know any other vision. I'm a pretty good vision caster, right? But I don't know any vision that is more compelling to people than being loved by the person who is discipling them in a group that is being challenged to love one another, and therefore spilling over to love the community around them. I can't emphasize it enough. If leaders aren't ready to say that centering discipleship also means that I have to actually actively love the people that I am serving and leading alongside of, then you have to do a lot of other kind of preparation work to do this. Loving people also means that, the other part of the story is that when we multiplied from year 1 to year 2, from one group to 3 different missional community leaders, oh my gosh, what an incredible multiplication plan. What people don't know is that, for us, we always do a one-on-one conversation with every single person who wants to be a part of this discipleship core, because we know that we are centering discipleship by intentionally discipling Christians who are already wanting to be like, yeah, I made my yes to Jesus. I just know that this life is calling more. I just know that God is calling me more to what it means to actually live a life of abundance and fullness. We have that conversation so that people are really clear about what the commitment level is, that there's going to be challenges as we kind of go through. Imitating Jesus also exposes the places where we're not really great at imitating Jesus. It also exposes the place where, like, oh, we're going to be in tension in community, living this closely, life on life with these people for an extended period of time, because that's what it takes to love an outside community together. All of that takes work. So the one-on-one conversation is making sure that it's really clear to people that this is not just, you just kind of come and attend a workshop or a teaching opportunity, and then you kind of go on your merry way. It actually is an invitation to be like, we know that you have a commitment to Jesus. Can you also make a commitment to one another? And therefore make a commitment to that identified space of mission together. And we ask people for just a year. Can you do this? What would happen in you? What would happen through you? And what would happen around you because of that commitment? So that calling and that vision casting is really high. From year 1 to year 2, we had 65 people come to our first ever vision day. Oh my gosh, 65 people coming could mean that, there's like 10 different multiplications that could happen, all these things. One-on-one conversations with all 65 people meant that only 12 people at the end of that first year said yes, which meant just one more multiplied missional community space.
So
So
I hear you talking about kind of this filtering. You're casting vision broadly, and then you're having these one-on-one conversations to really make sure they understand what it means to commit to this level of being discipled and being missional with others around them. And you're filtering. You're not just taking all 65 who said, yeah, that sounds awesome, I want to be part of that. And that filtering is probably part of the reason why you're seeing success, because you did do some filtering and really call for commitment. We see Jesus doing that, don't we? He preached to the crowds, but then he called people to come and pick up their cross and follow him. And not everyone did, but those who did, those are the ones that he invested more in. Yeah, that's so good. I think I interrupted you. And so was there something
Oh,
else?
no. I was just gonna just add that, a lot of times the biggest hurdles are that people's intentions are not because they want to be equipped to become missional within a community. People most of the time are craving, like, I just want to be a part of a community, or I just want to be a part of doing something meaningful, and, I'm like, we can all just get in line, especially in this very post-millennial Gen Z world where all new emerging leaders, everybody wants to do something meaningful, to do good, right? But I'm just like, I don't think imitating Jesus is just doing good. Right. And so it can't just be doing good, and it can't just be about being a part of a thing or a group. Right. It's both. Right. We're being called to imitate Jesus together in community, not in silos. What happens to a group of people who are imitating Jesus together and beginning to see their community around them through the same eyes that Jesus sees that same community? That's discipleship in a community setting, right? It's really challenging people to be like, this is not siloed work. This is not just to meet a need so that you have that sense of purpose met. It's also not just to meet a need so that you have that sense of belonging met, right? It's redefining, what does purpose look like in imitating Jesus, and what does belonging look like because we imitate Jesus. Belonging, imitating Jesus, looks like we're going to actually lean into conflict because we love my brother and sister enough that we want to resolve this and actively participate in forgiveness on a regular basis, right? If our discipleship community doesn't include that, it's going to be a lot of shallow relationships that will be multiplied, right? If we're only
Mhm.
going to be discipling people to just do good things, a lot of good service acts will happen, but I guarantee people will not have exercised the arms of knowing how to faithfully be with people, especially when the glitz and glitter of it goes away.
Yeah, so good. And I think what you're talking about has so much to do with becoming, imitating Christ, becoming like Jesus. It's not about joining a program. It's not about getting, having a meeting once a week, but it's really this life on life kind of community, learning and growing together in being transformed by God and His Word. Maybe just describe for us a little bit more, what does that community actually look like? Because I know for a lot of people, they can't get their heads around that. What does that actually look like when you start having those groups and those missional communities, or discipleship? As you took that 16 or 12 that you started working with for a year, I love that you only asked for a year commitment, and I'm sure many continue far beyond that. But you kind of starting there. What do you do with them when you get them together?
Yeah, I think my biggest advice for leaders is that if we can be people who are vision casting, but if we don't actually see a vision of a future people that we
Mm,
are convinced and committed to, it's going to be a really, really hard thing to center discipleship in our communities. So, and the question is, what do our future people look like?
mm,
Well, how do they behave? How do they participate in the city they live in? How do they get to interact with their neighbors? What do they look like and stand for in their workplaces? How do they behave within their families, right? In their schools, right? If we're not asking those questions about a future people, then I don't know how we can paint a vision for our current people about what discipleship is, because discipleship would actually affect all of that, right?
mm,
I
mm,
think one of the starting points that I talk about more in the book is about if we don't have a future vision of mature markers of discipleship, then we won't have a starting place about what kind of discipleship pathway or how we ought to equip our people to be discipled, and imitate Jesus, right? So my recommendation is, if you were to boil everything down, one of my really, really good friends, who I do a lot of ministry work translocally with, said that discipleship is essentially imitating Jesus so that we grow in our spiritual confidence and our social competence. We need
mm,
both to actively imitate Jesus. I would just add that we can only do that in the setting of a community on mission together. So, my recommendations for boiled down marks of maturity is that if Jesus is imitation, if discipleship is imitation of Jesus, then are people imitating into the maturity of Christ-like character?
mm,
Are they maturing into Christ-like wisdom? Can they navigate the complexities of their life and this world maturely, right? Are they actually maturing in Christ-like theology? Do they think about God the way Jesus thinks about God, right? Do they think
mm,
about how God thinks about humanity the way that Jesus thinks about human beings, right? Do they also make it so that the way that they think and know about God affect the way that they themselves think? Do we actually grow to have the mind of Christ in our decision making, in how we think and treat human beings, right? And lastly, it's Christ-like maturity in missional living or being sent. Is there an awareness that every disciple knows that the moment that I'm saying yes to Jesus is that I'm following him out towards another group of people, right?
mm,
Towards my neighbors, towards my family members, towards my coworkers, right? I think that having clarity on those four marks of maturity for every disciple, wherever you're at. I work with people in Southeast Asia, in Japan, in West Africa, right? These things are so universal to every single community who's trying to follow Jesus. And then if you have that clarity, then you can start asking, what will it look like for a mature group of people in my community who are growing in mature Christ-like character? what will change about my community? Because that
Mm-hmm.
tells me that that's actually happening, that missional
Mm-hmm.
living is actually happening, right? If leaders actually begin to do that, then they can go back like, what do I need now to pave the way to bring clarity to my people that God has given me to love and lead, so that they will be a little bit more equipped.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So it's that end visioning, as we call it in CPM DMM, of this is what we're looking in the kingdom to see. You know, what is it going to look like as people mature, as they're transformed, as they start loving their neighbors well, as they start imitating Jesus better? What's going to be different even in our society? And you know, a lot of times as we're working with people to develop those end vision statements, it's, you know, wives won't be beaten anymore. You know, there's going to be economic uplift that's going to take place. We're going to see people set free from addictions in our community. What is it that is actually going to be taking place in the community as a result of this growing, multiplying community of disciples that's taking place? But I find it really fascinating. You're starting with believers. You're starting with believers, challenging them, saying, "We know you love Jesus." And you know, are you willing to go the next level, you know, to what that really means? And then envisioning with them what will their lives actually look like, and then how that translates into the community. Really good. Yeah, I'm learning a lot, and it's just a delight to get a chance to talk to you. But let me ask another question here about missional communities. You've referenced that a couple of times, and there was another word you used, remissioning. You talked about remissioning. That's a new word to me, a new word, I think, to a lot of our listeners. What are missional communities in your, you know, what does that mean to you? What does that look like? And what is remissioning even?
Yeah, I think, yeah, those are really great questions, and I love when people just ask, and I just tell them I don't have all the answers, but I sure do can respond to a lot of them, right? I
Sure,
think
yeah.
that that's the brink of the collective leadership that we are in now. I think leaders are asking more questions, right, and trying to define and have clarity around things. So I just love it. Yeah, missional community for us in our local context is a discipleship core. So that group of committed Jesus followers committing to one another and committing to a community around them. So it's that 12 to 15 group of people who are being discipled with a discipleship pathway, right? Maturing, growing together. And they are tethered to a missional community. A missional community is open. It invites Christians and non-Christians in it. It probably meets the biggest need of that sense of purpose, sense of belonging. To me, it's like a really wonderful, active, intentional practice space for the disciples in that discipleship core to live out how they're being discipled. You know, if we're learning about, and growing about what does sanctification look like, and we're going through the fruit of the spirit, then one of the best places to practice out, am I actually patient, and is the Holy Spirit actually transforming me to be a more patient person? You kind of know that in that missional community space where you're working with both Christians and non-Christians within that community.
So that's like the bingo night. Is that what
Exactly.
you mean? Okay,
Exactly. Yep.
yeah.
Exactly. It's our identified space of mission. So we have open spaces, which is a weekly community dinner as one of them. Another one is a neighborhood-based our kahuhi, but just on that street, doing a houseless ministry together. But their neighbors are doing it together. We have a marketplace one. It's a business model missional community where this one a restaurant is hosting, being the living room for the entire community, right? So different models of what that missional community space is, but in general, it's an identified space of mission. There's a clarity on who the people are that we want to serve and minister to and with. There is a clear goal of that it's both. We have a goal of every time we have these kinds of spaces that it's 50% Jesus followers and 50% non-Jesus followers. So who we invite will change who comes to these
Mm,
gatherings, right? those kinds of things, and then we kind of multiply from there. Remissioning, because I also do, my previous context was remissioning an established church setting to become more thinking about how to center discipleship, right? I think remissioning is the work of, well, what parts of an already established or traditional model church or church plant needs to die
Mm,
so that discipleship can actually be centered, because we can't do all of it. That's probably
mm,
one of the biggest mistakes, is not pacing out and slowly structuring and restructuring, especially for the work that I do with established churches, how to think wisely and in timely ways, how to do structuring, restructuring, so that our churches are remissioned to center discipleship.
yeah, so good. So, remissioning is really working with established churches that say, hey, we realize we are missing the boat somewhere here. We want to do things differently. We don't know how to get there. And you're working with them to really look at what needs to die, what needs to be stripped away. How can we get discipleship back to the center and start focusing on it in an intentional way again? And yeah, I'm sure there's a ton that you could say. We could do a whole podcast just about that, but we won't right now. Go a little bit deeper. People can, I'm sure, access your resources on that. But yeah, really good. Well, time has been going fast, but this has been awesome. Tell me just what would you say? We have quite a lot of people who are listening who are from the global south. I love interviewing somebody who's from a Korean background and also a lady. Yeah, and so good to hear from you, and such wisdom that you've shared today for everyone. But would you speak specifically to our global south audience and to maybe even women, Asian women who might be listening and saying, it's not so easy always to be doing this church planning thing and multiplying communities? Any encouragement that you might have for them?
Yeah, I think it probably is a general encouragement to anybody, just because I'm just like, the things that all of us should be learning from the global south and from pockets of minority leaders, whether the minority is because we happen to be female, right? I actually think that if our male Western, counterpart leaders actually pay attention to the things that this particular set of leaders excel at, I think it is something to be mindful of. Then it's the same kind of advice. Is I think it's starting with who did God already give you,
Mm,
and does that group of people actually reflect the community that we are serving and living with?
mm,
If that leadership, and because if you're thinking about discipleship as these are the future disciple makers who will be making more disciples, I sure hope you're going to start with people who can be imitatable,
mm,
people who look and sound and smell and sing and dance and talk like the people that you are serving. So if your main initial disciple makers look different from the community that you're serving, I think that you have to think about that who question a lot quicker. I think it's also in the stage when people are centering discipleship and having to come up with a unique, localized discipleship pathway, we should be asking, who are we inviting into that space that will probably better speak into what that would look like? What does it mean to share and equip our people in what the full gospel is? How does our current culture listen to the full gospel that I might be missing because I'm limited in my own culture or my own viewpoint? So I need help in clarifying what those discipleship equipping needs are. So it really is being mindful and being encouraged that, I have a spot here in leadership because I know my people better than probably
mm,
anybody else today. God has
mm.
given me that charge to lead and love these people. And my invitation is, how can I share this with others so that we can more fully disciple our people together?
Yeah, so good. Well, thank you once again. And it's been wonderful to have you. I've learned so much. I know there's so much more. And I'm going to read and dig back into your book. But tell me more. And also for those who are listening, how can they get in touch with you or your resources? So, where do they buy your book? Yeah, share that with us.
Yeah. Centering Discipleship is on all platforms around the world, on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, IVP Press, and you can just find all that information on centeringdiscipleship.com.
Centeringdiscipleship.com. Awesome. Yeah. And any last words as we wrap up?
Oh, I just really, really believe that discipleship, if we do center it, is a hope for the future. I think that
Yeah.
as leadership and churches are changing so much, I think it's actually a simple solution. If we all do this well together, I think it's actually going to connect the church to mission in deeper ways than we've seen.
Yeah, I love ending on that hopeful note. There's so many challenges, so many difficulties, and yet as we do this, there is just tremendous hope that the church can be such a glorious shining light that Jesus designed it to be and bring that community transformation. There's a lot of challenges ahead, but there's a lot of hope as we go back to just obeying Jesus. He told us to go, make disciples, baptize them, teach them to obey. And as we focus again and center on that, there's a lot of hope for the future, for the church and for the world. So wonderful to have you in once again. And
Thank you.
yeah, everybody go get her book. It's a great book. You're going to love it. And I really endorse this book highly. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.